Hi, I'm Kirby Allison, and in today's video, I'm back in Austin, Texas at Texas Traditions. I'm visiting with legendary bootmaker Lee Miller. In the last episode of our series documenting the construction of my cowboy boots by legendary bootmaker Lee Miller, we saw Lee begin the process of lasting the boots before hand sewing the heels and the waists. This process used techniques that are centuries old. Next, we move on to the process of hand welting the boots. The welt serves as the backbone of a handmade pair of boots and is one of the key points of differentiation from a factory-made pair. So join me as we step back inside Lee's workshop to watch this beautiful craft up close.
So this is the sticky wax, and this is the stuff from Stephenville, made by the old bootmaker. What I did is I put it on a piece of leather, and then I burnished it, and then I came back with a second piece, and I pushed the wax deeper into the fibers, and then I also removed any of the excess. But what I am doing is I'm wetting the welt, and I'm wetting just the top, the underside. If I was to get this too wet, Kirby, I could actually stain the upper. So I don't want to do that. If I put water on this, I might cause some separation of the adhesive. I don't need the water, but I do want this to be flexible, and so because of that, I'm using water. But it's, you know, there's different ways of doing it, and some makers will go ahead and just submerge this in water, and then they'll case it for an hour or two. I don't want that because I'm afraid of staining. So imagine if I was making a light colored upper and I had a dark welt, I would stain it. So you got to be careful with water. Water will stain. Since I'm working with black, it doesn't matter. But the fact is, I use the same method for everything. You might as well. So the water just gives you a little bit of, it makes it a little bit softer. And if you've noticed, I've gone ahead and skived it. And I've started 3 holes, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do the same thing here. So I'll start here, and then I'll just go around to here. So this will take me a half an hour, 45 minutes to do that. All right. So much like the back part of the boot, when I'm going ahead and I'm sewing this, I'm sewing through the insole, into the lining, and into the side liners, and then into the ostrich vamp, and then into the welt. This is holding it all together. So that's the purpose of welting, is sewing everything together. Then once I put the sole on, the sole will be sewn to the welt. So this is, some people call this a Goodyear welting. It's actually, that's a machine called the Goodyear Welting machine. But it's just an old method, and it works very well. It's a mark of distinction. So when you see welted footwear, it's a nicer way of doing things. Yeah, the purpose of the welt is so that when you do wear out the soles, you can take the soles off, and then you can once again sew a new sole on to the welt. Now, over time, sometimes you'll notice that the welt might fall apart, and you can replace the welt. So just like I'm doing here, if the boot came in and the welt was broken or ripped or destroyed somehow, I can just simply sew on a new welt, and then once again put new soles and heels on. This is all considered the bottoming process. And so I'm hand welting, I'm hand inseaming. And I prefer it that way. I think it's much better than if you were to do it with a machine. It's just nicer. You can do a better job. It's tighter. You're using better methods. In some degrees, the welt provides rigidity, not flexibility. So it makes this more rigid, but it's not going to fall apart. So this is just a very nice way of doing it. You've got to somehow sew everything together so that you can put the soles on. And this is just, hand sewing it is just a wonderful way to do it. If you notice, I'm using the awl haft to go ahead and to tighten it, and then the other half is just being done with my hand. So if you look at the hand motions, now to tighten, use the awl haft and your hand. So this is the only area that I might hurt myself, but I have calluses there, so I don't need them. So by cutting the welt perpendicular to the backbone, I'm making it nice and flexible in the toe area. And it's going to allow me to bend without slashing the welt. So that's where you can control the way the grain flows and how you cut things out. So that's just a small thing that does help. So the welt is cut perpendicular to the backbone for flexibility, much like a toe box or a toe puff would be cut that way, much like a sole or an insole would be cut that way. You're always concerned with the fibers. If you notice that a lot of the makers will go ahead and pre-poke the insole, and I'm not doing it that way. I'm making the holes as I go. And so the reason that they're doing it that way is because they want to make sure that everything lines up perfectly. So they're pre-poking the holes in the insole before they last the upper, before they do any of this stuff. I'm doing it all at once. Interestingly enough, that guy from France, Virgil, I asked him that, and he said in France, He learned first to pre-poke the holes, but he said as you got better, you stopped doing it that way and you just started doing it the way that we do it, which is at the end. And he said the reason that you abandoned that and you just go ahead and do it all at once is because it's much quicker. So you get good at it and then you can stop doing that cautionary thing where you pre-poke all the holes. So that's just a little thing, you know, the way I was taught was to do it this way. But most of the makers, honestly, Kirby, do it exactly the way they pre-poke everything. You know, you see it all the time. Everything is pre-poked. I've got to get the welt to lay flat. And so the welt will be pleated, meaning I'm going to go ahead and try and put, much like a curtain, a little pleat in it. I want the welt to be relaxed, but of course the stitch has to be tight. By relaxing the welt, by pleating it, by gathering it up in these little tiny pipes, then I can go ahead and have the welt flip without any tension. So that is the basic for any toe style. You want to go ahead and you want to add a little bit of looseness to the welt in the toe. So that the stitch is tight, but the welt itself is pleated. And you'll see as I go around the toe, that's what I'm doing. So I'll do my first one, putting a little bit of pucker in it, right there, see? And by doing that, the welt will lay nicely. See, there it is. There's a little bit of a pleat. See, this is nice and tight, there's no pleating, but here there's a little pucker. And I'm going to do a few more of those as I move around the toe. Notice how this awl is just barely peeking through. So some of the makers, Kirby, will drive it way far forward. And if you notice, it's skinny here and it's fat here. And so the further I push it through, the bigger the hole gets, and the easier everything flows through the hole, but also it allows water to come in. So I want to keep that as minimal as possible, you know, just barely letting it poke through. So, so the big hole is on the inside, the little hole is on the outside, and that's where the water would come in. But so yeah, keep it just barely poking through. Just enough to give you a beginning. Put a twist. Pull. Cinch. At this point, I'm literally 5 minutes away from being done. Well, at this point, after doing the welting, I want to go ahead and get the welt to stand straight out and also compress the welt fibers. And so this hammering will do that. Yeah, so I want it to be coming straight out. And so the hammering will help me achieve that. I'm gonna use a dragon. This is a dragon. Okay. Okay. So this is a dragon. And it's a little bit nicer way of doing it. So here I am, done with the inseaming, the welting process, and I've used a little bit of water here to go ahead and to compress it and get it to stand out nice and straight on the dragon. And so at this point in time, we're going to allow this to dry, and then the next step would be to go ahead and to start adding in all the filler, the 40 penny nail, the leather arch cover, all the nice filler in here in the forepart. So traditionally the Western bootmakers would just use whatever's lying around, which happens to be lining leather. Yeah. And they would just go ahead, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a little piece here, then I'm going to go ahead and put in the 40 penny nail, then I'll put a leather arch cover over it, which will be designed for the heel height that the customer asked for. And it's all going to be shaped and sanded and made beautiful. Then the four-part filler will come on, then the leather sole, wooden pegs, sew the four-part, and then it's ready for the heel to be built. So this is just the welting part. It just ties everything together, and it has a beautiful profile. So in a cowboy boot, I'm going to use a 40 penny nail for the shank, and this is what it looks like. The old term would be a bridge timber spike, but it's a 40 penny nail. This is what I would use for an average sized person. If I had a very big person, I would switch to a 60-pound nail. These are really only used in fencing now, so I get them from a fencing supply. So you can't go to the hardware store and get these. In a cowboy boot, you've got this beautiful shank, and you need some rigidity in here, and so the nail will give you that. And then we'll put a leather arch cover over it to go ahead and to give it some shape. But oddly enough, the nail, if you were to go ahead and to find Roman sandals from back in the Roman days, they used the same technique for the military, for the soldiers. So you would go ahead and you would see the same thing. So what I'm doing is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to heat it up with a torch. I'm going to bang it out on each end, and then that particular nail will, once it's cooled down, I'll go ahead and I'll make the shape match the arch of the last, and that will keep it from changing. So you can see here on the anvil, this is where I'm going to bang it out. Here's the 40 penny nail flattened out at each end. Now what I've got to do is let it flow into that hollow of the shank of the last. So we'll mark where it's going to go, and then go ahead and form it. And there can be no air gaps. It's got to match that shape. So with a little bit of hammering, we'll get it to mirror that curve. And that's what will keep it nice and rigid. Check for any air gaps. Got one. So hammer it again. Make sure it fits, and it fits. I like the tradition of the 40-penny nail, just because it's just something you would see in cowboy boots. If you took them apart, if you took a boot apart 100 years ago, you would find this. So I like the tradition of it. You can buy a factory steel shank, which personally I don't like. They're even harder to find anymore. They don't make them in the U.S. anymore. So I just like, I like the tradition. Part of a cowboy boot is the traditional making of it, the use of the wooden pegs, the 40-penny nail, similar to a boot made 100 years ago. I think the customer loves it because they want something just steeped in tradition. And as a bootmaker, I also like it because it's historical. It's tradition. Now, when I first came to work for Charlie Dunn in 1977, this is what he showed me how to do, and I still do it today. So all these years later. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to put some leather down. Then I'm going to put this on it, and I'll put some bracing on it so it won't move side to side, and then I'll put a piece over it. And then we'll shape it, and then the last thing will be the filler for the forepart, and then the leather sole. So we've got all those different pieces now that have got to be put in here. But after shaping this, I'm going to put down a little bit of a barrier between the metal and the insole, just to keep the metal away from the insole. Then all the pieces will start going in. So this 40-penny nail will be cemented in place. So I'm going to put down a piece of leather, then I'll put this on top of it, and it'll all be cemented in place. It won't be hand sewn in place. Now, some makers do hand sew them in place. The reason I don't do that is because, honestly, if you take a boot apart to fix it and it's been hand sewn, it's wiggling around in there. So I just prefer to just put pieces of leather on either side of it to brace it so it won't move. And then I'll put a piece over it so it won't move. So it's trapped. So there's no hand sewing, but I do cement the nail in place. So for an insole, we're using a loose fiber structure. For an outsole, you're using a tight fiber structure. So we want a nice, soft, comfortable footbed. This is going to be the leather arch cover, and I'm going to go ahead and use the worst part of the sole bend for this. This is one of the rare opportunities you get to use the worst of anything, because in this, I don't really need it to be high quality. So I'm going to use a 5-in-1. This is a 5-in-1. So here we've got a nice leather arch cover, got a left and a right. Let's go ahead and thin it down. This is a skiving machine. And you can see what it's doing. So here's one that's been done. And then let's do the mate, same thing. Okay, so now we've got a pair. Now to prepare them. This is the little valley where the 40-penny nail will lay. So now some handwork. It's limber. It'll take the shape of whatever I want it to be. So we've got the piece of lining. Then we've got the nail, then we've got this, and then I'm going to wooden peg it. And then that way it's not, nothing will move. But I want to make sure that this is the right size. Let's take a look and see. I've planned it to be the right size, and by golly, it's the right size. Nothing needed. This is still a little bit too wet. I want to give it a little more time to dry. So now I've got my cement on, and I'm going to put the soles on today. I'm going to go ahead and sew the soles, wooden peg them, trim them. This is just rough trimming it. And I'm going to go ahead and do it by hand, and then I'll sew it. Then I'll sit back down and I'll wooden peg it, close the channel, wooden peg it, and then we're done. The people that know how footwear should be made, if you can go ahead and make them say, "That's good work," then you know you've done well. The way that factories get away with using nails here is that they'll have a metal plate on the last, and then the nail will bend over and brad. It's more labor to use a wooden peg than it is to use a nail. Nails are much quicker, but it's just a cheaper way to do something.